Hi everyone, it's Tamara here with another card making tutorial. This time I'm showing how I created my recent Sweet November Stamps Insta YouTube Pop card using the new stamp Flytterbee Lyra. I'm doing some ink blending, some COPIC coloring, and then using a lot of my card making scraps to make a shaker card without using any foam tape. So let's get started with some coloring. I grabbed a piece of smooth white cardstock, just measuring a little bit bigger than what I'll need for my background of my shaker panel. I always like to go a little bit bigger than what I will need, just to ensure that I get a nice smooth cut once I've cut that down to size. I'll be using Distress Oxides in Stormy Sky, Speckled Egg and Tumbled Glass for my background panel of my shaker. I'm just using my Ranger sponge domed applicators to put my ink onto my background panel, and just working in circular motions going between each of the colors until I get a nice smooth blend. Then I'll set this panel aside to dry while I work on the other elements of my card to make my shaker portion. Now I've grabbed out a number of white pieces of cardstock to cut out my background panel. So it's a great way to use up all your old white scraps that you might have in your stash to create a shaker without using any foam tape. I believe I got this die from Mama Elephant, but I can't find the packaging that it came in, and I cannot find it located anywhere to actually give you the name. It doesn't appear to be available anymore on the actual Mama Elephant website, so I do apologize that this may not be available if I am getting the correct company where I got this from. So I have leveled up a number of the panels. I think I used 6 in total. So I'm just getting the final one on so that you can see just how I'm just putting a little bit of glue on each of the panels to make sure that I can get a nice stick, because I will be putting the shaker pieces in between each of these openings. So I'm just now putting the final one on, lining that up and just giving it a good wiggle around to ensure that these all match up perfectly. And I will put that under a book to make sure it sticks nice and tight so that we don't have any places where our shaker pieces can catch. Now I've just grabbed out my Tonic Guillotine trimmer just to cut down both my panel for my front of my shaker portion, the actual acetate that goes behind that panel, and also my ink blended panel. So I'm just going to cut this down to size now. I do it evenly on both sides, and I will have all the measurements of all those pieces in my description box below for you. So I've just realized I was going to cut that in the wrong spot, so always remember to double check your measurements. And now that fits perfectly behind our shaker portion. I always get a little bit nervous of putting too much glue on pieces that will have acetate against them, because sometimes it can squish out and mark your acetate piece. So I've grabbed some double-sided tape and just using a acrylic block to break that off as I go around all the edges of my shaker portion of my card to get that acetate piece attached to the back. So just going around really carefully with that, and I did decide to put some on the inside pieces as well, just to make sure that that's adhered, because obviously we will be putting the shaker pieces in each of those openings. So I wanted to make sure that they didn't have a chance to go anywhere if there was some openings around that acetate piece. So I'm just kind of strategically placing it in 2 spots on either side of these like little snowbanks, so that it will hold it down as much as possible without putting some tape all the way along. I didn't want to put tape all the way along because I was concerned that some of that tape might show out. So you can see me fiddling with this to make sure this is all well hidden behind those snowbank lines. So I'll just get the final pieces on. I did that off camera because obviously you can see how I did it. Now you can see a little bit of that tape was sticking out, so I'm being very careful when I pull off all my tape pieces just to fold those in so that they won't show out on the outsides. So we'll just get those final strips off. I did burnish all these down with my bone folder to make sure that they stick, and it does make it a lot easier to pull off the release paper when you do burnish it down well. So I've got all our pieces off. I'll just line up our acetate piece and our shaker panel over the top. So I found it easier to line up one side and go over to the other, and give that a good press down to make sure all those pieces of glue are attaching. I'll get some glue onto our main shaker piece and put it onto our ink blended panel, ready for our shaker pieces to go into. And I'll give that a good press down. I do put it under a book for a little while to ensure that it is properly stuck down. Now, it's a lovely gift from my good friend Tomiko, and I found that these little snowflake pieces worked perfectly with this little shaker that I was creating. So thank you so much, Tomiko. This gift came in so handy, and having it in this little packet was great. I could just pour them straight into my little openings to make sure I've got enough pieces in each of those. So I do just put a small amount in each of the openings because I want to make sure that they do move around. So you want to make sure that they're flat before you put your top layer of acetate and the final layer of our Snowbanks die over the top. So I'm just pushing them out, making sure that they're nice and flat and they're not going to get in the way of our top layer. So instead of using a bit of tape, I'm actually just putting some glue around the edges just so that I make sure I don't get anything on those little snowflakes, and we'll get our top layer with the actual acetate and the final layer of Snowbanks die over the top to hold those shaker pieces in place. I found this banner die in my stash from Lawn Fawn, and I thought it worked really well with the flow of the Snowbanks die that we've made our shaker piece out of. So I'm just lining up my sentiment in the actual MISTI. So you can just cut it out and line up your piece like that, or if you like, you can just make a little like frame die, a little kind of guide for you to be able to cut that out at a later stage. So if you did do it that way, you didn't want to just cut it out initially like I've done, you can just put that piece of cardstock that you're wanting to use in your MISTI, put your little guide over the top, put your stamp in that, stamp that away, and then later on you can again use that kind of guide to actually cut out your sentiment with the actual die itself. It makes it really easy to do it that way when you do have a die that doesn't have an opening for you to see through. So I've now double stamped and double heat embossed this with embossing powder. I've heated up my heat gun off camera, and we'll get that sentiment nice and melted with our white heat embossing. So we'll set that aside to dry and cool. I've cut and scored a blue card base. Now, because we've got kind of a partial sentiment for our front, sending wishes, I thought I would now finish this off and do some inside stamping to finish off the sentiment. So I've grabbed out my MISTI again, and because my heat tool's already heated up, I thought I'll do some heat embossing of the final sentiment and a little snowflake that I had in my stash to actually finish off the inside of this card. So I'm trying to get it to unstick from my fingers, and then we'll pop the lid of our MISTI down, grab our anti-static powder tool again to prep our cardstock before we stamp. Then we'll grab our Versa Watermark ink to double stamp up our sentiment onto our card base. Do that again. So we've got a nice impression, and we'll get our white heat embossing powder poured all over the top of that and get that nice and melted to finish off the inside of our card. So I've got my folded piece of A4 printer paper, so it's easy just to pop that powder back into the container, and we've got our sentiment all nice and ink blended on the inside. So we'll just wipe off the excess anti-static powder tool with our cloth. Now you can see how well those shaker pieces move even without using the foam tape. You just need to obviously build up those layers. I'll be using some double-sided tape to add our shaker panel to our card front. So I'm just grabbing that and popping them all down. I'll grab my bone folder and just burnish all of them to make it easier to get that release paper off. And then we'll get that attached to our card front. So just pulling that, make sure we put that on the right side. I find it easy to stand up so that you can see that you're getting it even on all the four edges. Make sure that's lined up and give that a good press down. Now, as we have a bit of dimension with those shaker part of our card, I'm just going to add our sentiment and Flytterbee Lyra on with double-sided adhesive so that they're actually flat. So we'll get that all pulled off. And we'll get our sentiment lined up with that top kind of snowbank, because it kind of goes well with that line that travels. And we'll get Lyra put down the bottom, catching all those snowflakes. And this is the finished card for this tutorial. I thought this shaker worked really well with Lyra. It looks like all those snowflakes are falling and she's catching them. And even without using foam tape, you can see how much dimension you can get just using up some scraps that you've got in your stash to create a shaker card using kind of any type of background die that you might have in your stash. I hope you've enjoyed this card making tutorial. If you have, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see any future videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.